It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway for Jake and his friends. They had planned to go camping in the woods, enjoy the nature, and have some beers around the fire. They had packed their tents, sleeping bags, food, and flashlights and drove to the campsite. They arrived in the afternoon and found a nice spot near a lake. They set up their tents and decided to explore the area. They walked along the lake, admiring the scenery and taking pictures. They saw some birds, squirrels, and deer, but nothing else. They returned to their campsite and started a fire. They roasted some marshmallows and told stories. They laughed and joked and had a good time. They didn't notice that the sun was setting and that the woods were getting darker. They decided to call it a night and went to their tents. Jake shared a tent with his girlfriend, Amy. They cuddled and kissed and fell asleep. The other three friends, Mike, Lisa, and Tom, slept in their own tents. Jake woke up in the middle of the night. He heard a noise outside his tent. It sounded like a twig snapping. He thought it was probably an animal or one of his friends going to pee. He ignored it and tried to go back to sleep. But then he heard another noise. It was louder this time. It sounded like a growl. He felt a chill run down his spine. He nudged Amy and whispered in her ear, "Amy, wake up. Do you hear that?" Amy groaned and opened her eyes. "What? Hear what?" "Shh. Listen." They both listened. They heard another growl, followed by a scream. It was Mike's scream. Jake and Amy jumped out of their tent. They grabbed their flashlights and ran towards Mike's tent. They saw that it was torn apart. There was blood everywhere. They saw Mike's body on the ground. He was covered in wounds. His eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. They screamed too. Jake and Amy were paralyzed with fear. They couldn't believe what they saw. They looked around, trying to see what had attacked Mike. They saw nothing but darkness. They heard another scream. It was Lisa's scream. They ran towards Lisa's tent. They saw that it was also torn apart. There was blood everywhere. They saw Lisa's body on the ground. She was covered in wounds. Her eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. They screamed too. They heard another scream. It was Tom's scream. They ran towards Tom's tent. They saw that it was also torn apart. There was blood everywhere. They saw Tom's body on the ground. He was covered in wounds. His eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. They screamed too. They realized that they were the only ones left alive. They realized that something was hunting them. Something that was fast, strong, and vicious. Something that they couldn't see. They panicked. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know where to go. They didn't know how to survive. They decided to run. They grabbed their backpacks and ran towards their car. They hoped that they could make it there and drive away from this nightmare. They ran as fast as they could, dodging the trees and the rocks. They followed the trail that led to the parking lot. They prayed that they wouldn't encounter whatever had killed their friends. They reached the parking lot. They saw their car. It was still there, untouched. They felt a surge of relief. They ran towards it and opened the doors. They threw their backpacks inside and got in. Jake took the keys from his pocket and inserted them into the ignition. He turned them and started the engine. He looked at Amy and smiled. "We made it," he said. Amy smiled back and hugged him. "We made it," she repeated. They felt a sudden jolt. The car shook violently. They heard a loud roar. They looked behind them. They saw a huge creature standing on top of their car. It had fur, claws, teeth, and horns. It had glowing red eyes and a mouth full of blood. It was a werewolf. It looked at them and snarled. It smashed its fist through the window and grabbed Jake by the neck. It lifted him up and bit his head off. Amy screamed. The werewolf threw Jake's body aside and reached for Amy. It grabbed her by the hair and pulled her out of the car. It lifted her up and bit her heart out. Amy died. The werewolf dropped Amy's body on the ground and licked its lips. It howled at the moon and ran back into the woods. The end.